episode number 2 of the CloudFocus Weekly, titled When Clouds Collide, brought to you by Arkus, cloud computing experts. I'm your host, Jason Atwood, and joining me as my co-host is Justin Elstein. Justin, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Doing great. Thank you for asking.
You're very welcome. Let me just throw a little agenda up there and say we're going to talk about a couple of things. We're going to talk about the article came out about the NetSuite came out with an article talking about them sort of overtaking in the marketplace. We're going to talk about Rackspace's big announcement, the OpenStack. And then we'll talk about Facebook, which just came out. Facebook has a big announcement as well about selecting Salesforce.com as their sales platform. So it's interesting news and maybe a little twist into something else. And then, as of course, at the end, we'll do our CloudFocus app pick of the week, which is
Big feature.
which is officially named CloudFocus app pick of the week.
I feel like we need a drum roll for that.
I'll hit that up in post.
Thank you.
Okay. So why don't you get started and tell us a little about the NetSuite article and let's discuss it. Give it a little summary and let's discuss.
It was published by Reuters, that small news source
I have heard of
company
them,
in
yes.
London. Yeah. The headline kind of says it all. It says NetSuite could overtake SAP in a decade, which is a pretty strong statement when you think about it, because SAP is one of the big ERP type solutions in the enterprise, and to think about a cloud solution overtaking them in a decade is pretty interesting. Could the enterprise run in the cloud? And NetSuite is a product that
And why don't you
sort of
tell us a little bit about NetSuite?
yeah, promises that full ERP type of suite where you can do your account management or your CRM. I believe they have a product for CRM. They have a product for financing. They have a product for project management. Really, full featured suite on the NetSuite of products that live in the cloud. Um, Essentially, their CEO Zach Nelson flat out said to Reuters, "I think in 10 years we'll be bigger than SAP," and they do sort of fight in the same space. And it's interesting because NetSuite is majority owned by Larry Ellison, who's the CEO of Oracle, who actually, when speaking on behalf of Oracle, likes to frown on the cloud and isn't too much of a fan of the cloud.
Well, it's interesting
But
because
then,
he's invested in Salesforce too.
right, he's an investor in all these popular and uh, really good, effective, uh, profitable cloud solutions like Salesforce, for example, and NetSuite. So it's actually interesting because of because he on one hand he poo-poos it, and then on the other hand he invests in it, just not for his own company. Um,
Right. Well,
you know,
I think that brings up an interesting point, which is that why these companies like these big companies, and I'll make it even. I'll throw in some other some link bait, as it were, and throw in Microsoft and IBM, who have clearly been putting out their cloud strategy recently, um, and are trying to get in there. And why? I guess it's good news, right? So if I were NetSuite, I want good news. I want attention. So if I come up and actually this comes right out of, I mean, boy, we're all going to circle back here, but it comes back right out of the playbook, as it were. Pick when you're starting a business, when you're a startup, pick someone to rail against, because if you pick someone to go up against, then it gives people someone to rally behind you, right? To say, oh yeah, let's get them. Apple does it with Microsoft. Salesforce does it with Oracle in some ways, and they actually do it with Microsoft too. But pick your
a
enemy.
lot of people do it with Microsoft.
Yeah, well, because they're the biggest they're the biggest people. So pick your enemy, and then you can be the David, and they're the Goliath. I think for NetSuite, it's interesting for them to say, yeah, well, they've picked their enemy, right? SAP is their guy; they're going after
Yep.
him. But what's to stop these companies, these very large companies with unbelievable amounts of resources, on just saying, hey, listen, if we want to be in the cloud game, we'll just take $30 million or $30 billion and we'll invest it and we'll be in the cloud. And
Yep.
and they can, and in some ways they're doing it. I think the more what the crux is that these companies are, they're large ships, and there's the old saying about, you can't maneuver a large ship quickly. It takes a long time to turn a large ship around, and I think that's the case with these big players, the IBMs, Microsofts, um, and the SAPs and Oracles, is that they're infrastructure, their hierarchy, their personnel are all built to do one thing, and to move them from doing that into this other environment, and change the way they think and change their business model. They don't. I don't think they necessarily have. They're not well equipped to do it. That's not saying they can't do it because I think they will. But just like you could say, Microsoft tried to get into search. They have all the money in the world, but how come they haven't been able to sort of take it away? They've tried, and they've tried many, many times. In fact, Bing is their latest.
I think Bing has been the most successful to date.
Right,
Not to get
but they also
really
just
too
bought
far off
someone, right?
topic.
Bing existed, and they bought Bing, and they rebranded it, and then they pushed it out as Microsoft Bing, and in fact have kept Microsoft away from the brand. It's just Bing. They don't say Microsoft Bing. They just say Bing. So I think it's the most successful. They also pumped hundreds of millions of dollars in advertising to
Yep.
get it up there. So
Just to come back to the article for a second, and talk about this 10-year roadmap for NetSuite to catch up to SAP. Just to throw the numbers out there, last year NetSuite did $166 million in sales, compared to SAP's 13.4 billion with a B in sales. So that's just 10 years. You want to make up about $12 billion, $12.5 billion. It's going to be interesting to see if they can do that.
and that's to
But
say that
again,
SAP stocks,
NetSuite's,
right?
well, that's the thing. NetSuite sales over the last year have actually grown 9%, while SAP's have fallen by the same 9%.
Right.
And Gartner has predicted and expected the cloud services market to grow, by double figure percentage, 15 to 20% over the course of this coming year. Uh, so it'll be interesting to see if NetSuite can ride that tidal wave, and it's a lofty goal for 10 years, but I think uh, the climate is right unless SAP goes ahead and either gobbles them up or creates their own cloud solution that's not 3 years behind.
And I think that's actually a really good segue. Thank you for setting it up like that.
You're welcome. I
Um,
tried.
to talk about the next article, the next news topic that's happened in the week of cloud, this week in cloud. That's not the name of this podcast. Which I think is probably, out of the three things we're going to talk about, is probably the biggest splash. NetSuite releasing, we're going to be bigger than SAP in 10 years. Yeah, okay. Facebook selecting Salesforce. We can talk about how the clouds collide, which is the episode title. But I think Rackspace, which is a dedicated hosting facility, really built on a platform of having servers. And I will admit, I've been a Rackspace customer for about 10 years. So
Does
whenever
it feel good to have admit that?
yeah, it does. It does.
Okay.
It's getting off my chest.
All right.
Well, because what's interesting, when I call up and I say, they say, "What's your customer number?" and I tell them my customer number, it's a very low digit, and they're like, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, no, that's really." They're like, "I didn't know we had customers that low, in that the low number." So, but they have grown from what was basically a Texas. They're based in Texas, hosting company where they rack them and stack them. Their model was a little bit slightly different from other players, in that they didn't always try to go on price. They tried to beat people by support. So their prices were always a little bit higher than just buying a dedicated server. And just for any of all of you that don't know dedicated servers, it's what cloud was 10 years ago in some ways, but not, it doesn't have any virtualization. But basically, to say, instead of having your server in your server room, you just hire someone, you hire one in someone else's server, but it's their job to take care of the hardware and the software that they say they'll take care of. So the operating system, the database, whatever's on there, and then they support it. So if hard drive fails, they check it. If the Ethernet fails, they pick it up. then then you have full access to it, so it's your machine, but you're responsible for anything you kind of do to it from a software level. And it
So what exactly has Rackspace done
so
recently to sort of innovate and make that more cloud?
Well, that's why I'm trying to bring it back. So they've been a huge player and grown and grown and grown in the last, I would say, since as long as I've known them. 2 years ago, they started to get into cloud. They bought a company called, I think, Maso, and they bought recently, I think a year and a half ago, they bought a company named SliceHost, which I was actually a customer as well, which does virtualization. And they bought one other. They bought one other cloud server uh, provider. But basically, they started getting into because they have all these servers, they have the ability to do virtualization. So they bought a company that's doing server provider. So they started to get into the cloud, right? And they started rebranding themselves as okay, you want dedicated hardware, we can do that for you, which isn't cloud at all. That's just hosting. And then, oh, we have now cloud services, and they're going to compete with the likes of, oh, they bought Jungle Disk, right? So a Jungle Disk, a product we actually use, which does sort of cloud backup and cloud local area networks. Okay, so they've been building these services the last couple of years and kind of putting them together and slowly building them so they kind of connect because they were all these different companies. What they just released 2 days ago, which I think is a game changer, and I think we'll look back in 2 years and say, "Wow," or maybe 5 or 10 when NetSuite's as big as SAP. We'll look back and we'll say they released something called OpenStack, which they basically open sourced their cloud computing software. So the stack that allows them to build cloud software for their cloud files, for Jungle Disk, and they've released some of it at this point for and for their Sliceos, for their virtualization, they've released the software that they had built out to be proprietary. It's now open source.
Hmm.
Um, that's a changer. It's a changer like Apple getting involved in WebKit and making WebKit one of the biggest HTML rendering. It's used by everybody now, including Google Chrome. It's big because it makes it something that it's not proprietary to any one company, and they're actually licensing is under the Apache 2 licensing. As you probably know, Apache is a great web server, but it's open source and it's used by basically everybody because it's free, it's very, very fast. It's one of the most well supported web servers out there. It's got tons of projects behind it, but it's open source, so it's freely available. And they released it under the Apache 2 license, which is very open. There's lots of different open source licensing. I could do a whole podcast on that. I'm not going to, for your sake, not mine. And
Please don't. Thank you.
but basically, it's saying we are letting you have an open source platform to build cloud services. So any company can use their software to now build cloud services, the virtualization, the multi-tenancy. You supply the hardware, you can build cloud services. Whether you want to make that a private cloud, right, and install it in your own data center, which again that term is still not doesn't sit right with me, or whether you want to make it a public cloud and use it for another service. I think that's a game changer because it's basically taking a lot of the stuff that Microsoft, Salesforce, Google have sort of kept as their own. Amazon, which is I think their major competitor, and said, "Listen, you guys, anybody can be the next Amazon. Here you go. Here's how you do it. Here's the software to do it." I think that's huge. And I think it's called OpenStack, and this will be the thing that rattles around the internet for a while. Um,
So anyone can build their own cloud service
mhm.
on Rackspace's cloud
Or their own.
or
Or
their own cloud, which is hosted within the Rackspace
No, no, no. Or
environment.
go and build their own server farm and go build their own cloud, right? So because Amazon doesn't host their stuff in Rackspace, Rackspace has their own. So yes, it allows them to do both within Amazon, within Rackspace, which is probably the genius of Rackspace because they're saying, hey, you want to build your own cloud, use our use our servers. Great.
Right.
But you can also, since it's open source, you can also use it and go build your own. And then people will get back to it. You'll have a lot more involvement from the outside community. It becomes a really, again, things that go open source have a life of their own, good and bad. I mean, we use open source software all the time. Firefox is open source. Plone, which we use for content management, is open source. A lot of these very popular things are open source, and they have a life of their own. They're not controlled by sort of a corporation. They're controlled by either a foundation or the programmers involved. And so I think it's a game changer in terms of the cloud space for where it will go. Not tomorrow, not the next day, but maybe 2 to 3 years. And I think I think it allows smaller companies to jump into a game that was very hard to jump into to develop that kind of software. So I think that kind of leads us from very small companies jumping into open source to the last article before we get to our CloudFocus app pick of the week,
It's a
um,
mouthful.
which is actually just news that came out. We were recording this on a Wednesday. It came out like literally hours ago, which is that Facebook, a small player in the cloud services or the cloud social cloud, as you could call it.
Over 500 million users now.
Yep. Who has some other news going on, which we could touch on. Selected Salesforce.com for their sales management or CRM. Let's just call it what it is. Um, it was a press release, so it's supposed to make a splash and make everybody go, "Wow!" We don't really know the size of the deal. I don't know how big Facebook is in terms of people. So I don't know if it's Salesforce. Salesforce has done multi-hundred or 50, 60,000 people seats for Japan Post and things like that. Um, but what it does is it really brings two of the massive players. I mean, there's nobody out there doing more in the social space than Facebook, right? You could argue that Twitter's close, but not really. Facebook's sort of number one. And then in terms of cloud services, platform as a service, software as a service, who's bigger than Salesforce at this point? And that game could always change. So those two kind of shaking hands again, and saying we're going to work together. And you can see that this is the start of both customers, but also the start of probably some other projects. They've done some things before in the past, so I think this is a lot to come, that we'll probably see sometime in the middle of or beginning of December. What do you think?
Yeah, I wonder how if they're already using it or not. Because I was reading the press release from the PR Newswire, and it looks as if there's a statement like Salesforce has already deployed the system across sales operations teams along with developer relations to automate workflows and approval processes that integrate with half a dozen existing systems. The way that they wrote that makes it seem like they've already chosen it. Oh, and by the way, they rolled it out already, which I'm not sure if that's the case or not. Because the press release says that they're today announcing that Salesforce has selected or that Facebook has selected Salesforce CRM. So a little confusing, but I'm sure that they'll adopt Chatter almost immediately within Facebook if they don't already have their own little private Facebook within Facebook. Not who
And
knows.
and that's where this discussion I think becomes interesting because Salesforce up to this point has really stayed away from social networking. It has, yes, there's the Salesforce for Twitter App Exchange app 2 came out this week. But and they do have Facebook integration to some degree. They also
Which
have
I don't think has been very successful. I have
it's
I
because
have
it's not
not
packaged enough.
seen.
Because it's not packaged. It's like a roll your own. They actually
Yeah, I
released.
haven't seen very good, like, the classic demos like the Starbucks demo or the Avon Mark book demo. I just haven't seen very good
Real implementation,
Salesforce
yeah.
apps inside of Facebook.
Right.
Um,
And that's what's sort of interesting is that and Salesforce has done huge deals with Google before. Google actually uses Salesforce for their sales stuff. They allow for you can actually there's an API to send things to Google's App Engine through Salesforce as well as Amazon. So in some ways, Salesforce likes to play a little bit of Switzerland in this and say, "Hey, listen, we work with Twitter. We got a Twitter thing. We work with Facebook. We got a Facebook thing." But with Chatter, which I'll do the recap for those of you who didn't listen to podcast episode number 1. Chatter is Salesforce's new internal sort of social marketing, or social network, but for internal to Salesforce. But clearly, for all of us who started using it, we thought, wow, wouldn't this be cool if somehow I could also connect it to my outside and maybe do some cross pollination for some people. I might want to cross pollinate between my Chatter and my Twitter and my Facebook status. Um, Maybe not, but so I think this is interesting because those two they do have two very different markets, but they also are kind of playing in the same game, right? That sort of social networking. One's playing on the very social side, moms, dads, kids, friends, whatever, and the other one's playing on corporate networks, corporations. But those things, they're all colliding now. All these clouds are colliding. The social networking cloud is colliding. Twitter's colliding with Salesforce because people run their businesses from Twitter, right? They announce their thing. They do press release. They do leads from Twitter. Facebook is the same thing. Like people have Facebook pages and fan pages, and they announce their menus on Twitter now, on Facebook now. So the worlds between business and social networking, I think, are all kind of colliding at this point. It's interesting to watch these two companies who have a vested interest in both kind of make a nice statement to PR. So that's the three stories to get us going. And now for everybody's favorite segment, our second week for our CloudFocus app pick of the week. We'll be right back. No, we're not going to be right back. We're just going to talk about it. So I'm going to ask you to go first, Mr. Edelstein. Tell
Oh,
me what's
I went
your
first last week, I think, but I'll go first again
well.
because
Well, I
you know
just
why
I
not?
I just spoke, and so I'm going to take a break. So go ahead, tell me your CloudFocus app pick of the week.
So my CloudFocus app pick of the week this week is all about backup. A
Good,
lot of
good.
people, when they jump into the cloud, they have a little bit of a cloud conniption. Where
Cloud conniption.
a cloud conniption, like my data is not going to be in my data center, and what happens if something happens, and how do I get it back, and this and that. So there is a product. It's called Backupify. The URL www.backupify.com.
It'll be in the show
And
notes.
what's that? It will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And what Backupify does is it actually will back up your data that you're using on cloud services onto another cloud. So if you are a Google Apps user or a big Twitter user or a Facebook user or WordPress user or have a lot of photos up in Picasa, Backupify can actually take that data that's in a cloud and back it up onto their cloud. So you can actually recover Google Docs. That, not saying that Google Docs you'd ever lose them, but maybe someone deletes one accidentally, or user error, something happens and the doc is gone. Backupify can actually allow you to recover that document. uh, if somehow your WordPress blog gets corrupted, it can be backed up by Backupify very easily. They have a couple different pricing plans. They have one for social media and personal accounts. They have a basic free account, so you can go there right now and set it up for free with 2 gigs of storage, one account per service. So it'll back up one Twitter account, one Facebook account, one Picasa account, etc.
Right.
And it's always free, so they say. Um, you can get the Plus, which is 10 gigs of storage, 5 accounts per service, monthly zip archives, so they will archive your stuff monthly and zip it up, and also give you access to some beta services. Beta services like new services that are coming out every day. I don't want to call Flickr a new service, but services in beta might be something like a blogger or your Google Contacts, your Google Calendar, etc. Um, Things that aren't in beta right now are Google Docs, Zoho, Delicious, Twitter, Flickr, and PhotoBucket. So you can do all those things. They also have business pricing. Up to 250 gigabytes of storage and 50 Google Apps accounts can be backed up on Backupify. I think it's actually quite an interesting product.
It is. It's interesting that it backs up its stuff to Amazon. So you're right. They are backing up one cloud to another cloud,
Yep.
and in some ways it's for the business, right? Because most of these business services that we use, cloud services like Gmail, Google Docs, Salesforce. If you're going to use Zoho, I'd say the business ones, not the ones that are the social networking ones. You pay for these services. And one of the things you pay for in your monthly fee, right, that is you're paying for backup, right? You're paying for them to make sure that your data is always secure, and that's part of the reason you pay. I mean, it's not broken out as a line item, but certainly in Salesforce, they allow you to actually pull the data, on different level accounts, pull the data down, or schedule the data to be pulled down, and you can pull it down if you want to have like a hard copy on your or a soft copy on your own drive. What's interesting about this is you are just kind of backing up from one cloud service to the other. Okay. And it's also just doesn't seem to be really, it seems to be more based on social networking sites than, you know, business. So I don't see the other big players in the sort of CRM space, or, I don't see any of that here. I see it's the Twitters and the Flickrs, because obviously it's based on the APIs, right? So they've all these services have created an API that you can then go in and pull data from. Without that API, these guys wouldn't be able to do it. I think they'd be more interested if they added more sort of enterprise class software as a service.
Yeah,
So
right now the one enterprise class one is Google. They have Google
Zoho,
Apps.
you could throw in Zoho. You could maybe throw
Mm,
in Basecamp. I think those are two that I would throw into the enterprise class. You can use Basecamp in an enterprise, but again, they're saying Basecamp, not saying all of 37 Signals products, right? They have multiple products. That's only one of them. So interesting, but good pick. That's your pick, your Cloud Focus app pick of the week.
you can't laugh at it. You created it.
Yes, I can both laugh at it and create it. That's the
Okay.
power of me. So I'm gonna pick one that, because I need to get it out. It's kind of
Yeah,
like
what's yours? Get it
it's
out.
I you know it's I would probably pick it every week because it is something that I literally live by. I'll give all credit to Mr. Merlin Mann, who I probably first heard about this from a long, long time ago. Merlin Mann's a productivity blogger, I guess. Is that a good description?
I don't know. Does he blog anymore?
He does. He does. He
Okay.
blogs once in a while.
He's a blogger, podcaster, web personality.
Yeah, that seems to be um a new title on LinkedIn. Oh, I didn't see LinkedIn as one of the things you could back up. Anywho, so I'm a productivity guy. I really love productivity, as you know. I read all the books. I believe, in enhancing productivity, always working at it, kind of like a constant thing. And one of the tools that I use that is a cloud-based tool, is called Evernote. If you know Evernote, you can just shut off the podcast right now because you love it. Don't do that, because I'm going to tell you more things that you probably never knew you could do. But Evernote in basics is let's start with it's notes. It's just notes, right? So it's personal notes that you can write, and it's stored on a website. Where Evernote becomes more interesting is they've built out lots of applications that sync. So they have a client for Windows, and you can then write your notes. You can categorize them, you can tag them, you can put them in folders, you can do rich text, and that's great. And for Windows, they also have a client, a hard, client for Mac OS 10. So right there in your dock, you click on it, it syncs them all down. They also have a client for the iPhone, and they also have a client for, I think, BlackBerry, and I think, let's see if I see,
They
um,
they must have one for Android.
and I think Android. So the point is here that everywhere you go, you can have your notes with you. You can take notes, and they'll sync up, and they sync across all platforms, and they do it well. And as we'll probably say in a million different times, but you can
You know,
also,
I'm sorry to cut you off. They also have the Palm and the Windows Mobile.
there you go. So it's it's all your notes belong to us, which is that you can write them anywhere, you can get to them. Search is great. But it has a whole bunch of other things. You can put in other documents like PDFs, with their they have a free plan, but then they have a pay plan. What it also does is they do OCR, which is optical character recognition. So I can take a snapshot of a document, a picture, and send it up through the iPhone, let's say, and they'll run it through the OCR and look for words. And then when I search my notes, they'll pick out those words out of the document, whether I hand wrote it or whether it was just, a picture of something. So people use it for wine labels. You take a picture of a wine bottle, and it will OCR the wine label, and you can search for it that way. And it'll
I
actually
use it for whiteboarding.
it has it for white. You can take a picture and whiteboard and send it up there. A business card. I mean, the things are endless. Anyway, it's Evernote. It's cloud based because it is all actually stored in the cloud. It does sync down, and I'll say the thing that it does that we'll say is very difficult because we've been around it is syncing is difficult. Syncing is hard, but they do it very well to multiple clients, and I've been using it for years. Um, they even allow you to scan right to it, and you can put PDFs. And again, there's all sorts of stuff you can.
Also geotags, does it not?
It
If you take a note on your mobile device that has the ability to tell it where you are,
Yep.
you can sort of search or filter by location of where you took a note. It has, when you have hundreds of notes, thousands of notes, it's easier to, sometimes those features are really make a difference in finding stuff.
So what's beautiful is there's a free version. I've been using the free version for a long time. I can't figure out. They haven't made the jump to the premium, and I'm usually a guy who goes for the premium. They haven't made it for a reason I can just go. That's the reason I'm going to go up because it has enough in the free version, which is great for everybody else. You can share them, tag them. You can. There's even someone developed a little app exchange product where you can actually sync them. Kind of doesn't work 100% great. We've tried it a couple times. Sync them with Salesforce. So if you're a big Salesforce user and you want to have notes so there's a whole idea of you could then attach the note from Evernote to a contact or a lead. You can get kind of deep in there. But anyway, great product. Evernote, evernote.com. EVRNOTE.com. You'll notice once you'll know them by the little their icon is a elephant and like an elephant head for I guess remembering, for the elephant remembers forever. And they're a very good company. They always update their stuff. They just released, and I guess this is why it's a good pick. They just released called the Evernote Trunk, right? So they're playing with the elephant. It's very funny. But basically, it's all these apps that work with Evernote, either feed things into Evernote or do other things like take transcribe voice notes in Evernote. And so there's all sorts of things they do. It's called the Evernote Trunk. If you go to evernote.com, you'll see it there. It's kind of like their little app exchange or their little iTunes app store. I mean, it's probably 50, 60 things. I looked over it the other day. But great product. Everybody should use Evernote forever and ever and Evernote. And so so you use Evernote? Just want to make you do?
I do, yeah. I use it mostly on my iPhone. I do have the client installed on my MacBook, but I use it mostly on my iPhone for notes on the go, and oftentimes when I'm whiteboarding with a client or just whiteboarding, doodling on my own to capture some ideas, I then will take a snapshot of it, tag it, and I know it's safe. I can then erase the whiteboard. Right.
So that's Evernote, and that'll bring us to the end of the second episode. Thank you, Justin, for joining me for two of the second greatest podcasts on the planet. And we will see you next week, where there'll be more cloud news to discuss and more CloudFocus app picks of the week. Until then, this is Jason Atwood and Justin Elstein saying, hang out in the clouds. Bye.